All right, industry standard shared parameters. A very important discussion and a very important aspect of a BIM model, in particular a Revit model. So we've talked about this before. We've been talking about this with manufacturers and users and engineers and entities like Autodesk and ASHRAE. And the discussion is still ongoing, but this video has helped to move it along. It's helped to show people what you can do with a standardized set of shared parameters. So with that regard, there was a couple things we took into consideration when we updated this shared parameter list for this mechanical and electrical shared model productivity pack. One was preserving proper data types. Very important to be able to use things in calculations, to be able to trust the information in schedules. Shared parameters have to have the proper data type. No more numbers, no more text representing this and that. We need to figure out a way with proper data types. The second thing was to make names clear and easily understood. I really felt that the initial release of the MPP, we did that very well. We followed Sean Zerby's recommendation for shared parameter naming, and they were all very clear. However, they ended up getting a little long, and in some cases that made it difficult for users to see what the parameter was in the Revit project environment. So not only should they be easily understood, but they should be short enough to be visible in any particular window. We want to keep units out of names so that we can talk about these shared parameters with people in the metric system, Europe, in Asia, and all those other places. So these are meant to be universal. And then also using some of the features in Revit, tooltips, giving users information. If we do have to abbreviate stuff, use a tooltip to indicate what the shared parameter is. And then lastly is hidden parameters. Another functionality in Revit. There's a lot of parameters we're using in this productivity pack that do a lot of calculations, but users don't need to see that. So we've made a lot of parameters hidden so that you don't see those in the project. So what do we have? I'm going to demo our shared parameters with an Express tool from CTC. So once again, these are shared parameters for the mechanical and electrical disciplines. Primarily, they've been detailed for mechanical, which is my discipline, but it's meant to be a starting point. So in regards to parameters like airflow, some things that need to be taken into account with shared parameters. One is differentiating in the world of auto sizing between design values, calculated values, and input values. So this set of shared parameters includes functionality for auto sizing across many families with calculations for electrical, for mechanical, from the connectors, not from the connectors, all of that stuff. So that needs to be taken into account. As you can see, some of these input parameters function as overrides in some of our equations. And then also was getting general enough with shared parameter names so they could be used over and over and over again. So instead of calling a supply fan, and then needing another set of parameters for return fans, why not call it a fan and use the system properties, the system classification in Revit to determine what the airflow is. So that was the next strategy, is just generalizing parameters enough so that they could be used in reducing unique situations. Let's look at like a heating coil, for example. So the big item here, which we talk about in the user manual, is abbreviations. So the shared parameters released with the initial release of the MPP were clear. They were in sentence format, but they were just too long. They didn't function in the Revit project environment well enough. We got a lot of feedback on that. So what we did is we abbreviated parameters, and any time that a parameter was abbreviated, so like this heating coil leaving air temperature, what we ended up doing is we included a tooltip, which is the full language of the abbreviation, so users can find out exactly what that shared parameter is. speaking about abbreviations, so how do we determine, what's the right abbreviation and what's not? I struggled with that for quite a while, and then I ended up coming across my ASHRAE Handbook of Fundamentals. So ASHRAE is a huge organization in our industry that have developed many industry standards for us. Why not utilize what they've already done for abbreviations? So I have the handbook online here. This is chapter 38, abbreviations and symbols. So if anyone is concerned about abbreviations that we've used, we are leaning on ASHRAE as the leader of an industry standard. So all these items in here that are found in our parameter names, we have abbreviated. So not all of these apply, but for things like entering water temp, EWT, that's our shared parameter name. So we have a basis for our abbreviations. So like right there, leaving water temperature and entering water temperature. Let's look at some more functionality, which is this release includes the articulated Cartesian arms, and those need sets of parameters to control them. So if we look at condenser pipe connections, we needed a set of standardized parameters for each type of arm, for each type of connector. So for condenser pipe connections, for heating water pipe connections, for cooling water pipe connections, those all needed a standardized set of shared parameters for the arms, which we'll be talking more about in chapter 3. And then also, if we look at like inlet duct, which we've used just about as much as outlet duct parameters on families. So once again, making things more general so that they can fit many more situations. So instead of calling the parameters for a supply outlet from a rooftop unit, for example, why not call it an outlet duct and the return air an inlet duct? Because those same sets of parameters, inlet and outlet, can now be used for exhaust air. They can be used for, exhaust fans, for transfer fans. They fit so many more applications. So that fits that generalization. Now, as the user manual outlines, you can't, industry standard shared parameters doesn't really work without a way to use them. How are they used? What's the solution set? What's the example set? And we hope to cover that vast goal with this release of the MEPPP. The user manual goes into many details about why these parameters are the way they are and why they function. For example, if we look at a schedule sheet in our browser, so let's look at HVAC schedules. Manufacturers, they need to see how these parameters are going to be used. What are the data types? How's it going to look in the schedule? We've paid very special attention to the data types and keeping those proper in these schedules and in the shared parameters. But these essentially 150 schedules are an example of the standardized set of schedules to go with a standardized set of shared parameters. But schedules isn't just enough. So we have a lot of auto-sizing families. We have host family functionality, and we have these families that can move their connectors anywhere the user wants them. So that also requires, like I said, those sets of parameters for each connector. But also, things need to be thought in regards to auto-sizing. So this is a sizing schedule, which we'll talk about more. But essentially, this outlines, how these parameters are going to be used in this next evolution of auto-sizing and automating our industry. There's calculated values, there's final values, there's overrides in it, and inputs. So how do you use those? And we hope to have covered the majority of that in this first release. Looking at overrides for given parameters and for things like that. So this is an ongoing discussion. Like I said, I've been engaged with many manufacturers, lots of entities, and I want the discussion to keep going. Does these shared parameters need to be the final stop for everyone? No, but let's talk about it. Let's find out what you guys like, what you guys don't like, and let's make it better, because everyone's life is going to be better if we're all using the same set of shared parameters. We all know that. So if manufacturers are using things that populate our schedules, engineers and users are spending less time fixing family content and connector functionality and all that. So you'll be hearing more about that, but let's talk about it.